It was just after midnight when I heard the front door click shut, a quiet, final sound that echoed louder than any goodbye he could have said. The room was filled with traces of him, the faint scent of sandalwood cologne, his jacket still carelessly thrown over the sofa, and the half-empty coffee mug that now sat cold beside my unread book. As the silence settled around me, thick and tangible, I reached for a pen, knowing the only way to face this night was to write down everything I wished I'd said, but hadn't. My hand trembled slightly over the blank page, hesitating. Before, I scribbled softly in the dim glow of the table lamp. Have you ever regretted staying silent when your heart begged you to speak? Beth Lawson lived in Portville, a quiet seaside town on the rugged coast of New England, where salt air mingled with the scent of old books, and mornings were greeted by the comforting toll of the distant church bell and the gentle calls of seagulls soaring lazily above. Her small white cottage, simple yet inviting, sat tucked between towering maples whose leaves had already begun shifting from emerald green to a kaleidoscope of burnt orange and deep crimson. Within her modest home, each corner whispered softly of a life carefully rebuilt, walls lined with shelves of cherished novels, houseplants lovingly tended, and a cozy sofa draped in knitted throws. But despite its comforting familiarity, the cottage held a lingering sense of something incomplete, like a story left unfinished midway through. Beth, now 44, moved through her daily routines with quiet grace and composed dignity, greeting her neighbors each morning with a practiced smile and softly murmured pleasantries. To those around her, she seemed perfectly content, running her quaint bookstore and coffee shop, Chapters and Coffee, a beloved sanctuary filled with the gentle hum of conversations, soothing jazz records spinning softly, and patrons who treated each other like family. Yet beneath this calm facade, she wrestled silently with a quiet ache of regret, carefully hidden beneath layers of well-rehearsed serenity. Her first marriage had ended quietly, almost gently, 6 years ago, leaving no lasting bitterness, only cautious solitude. It had taken her years to open herself again, to trust Nathan, only to feel the familiar sting of abandonment once more. Now, in the gentle autumn twilight, she often found herself standing quietly on her front porch, wrapped loosely in an old cardigan, staring absently toward the darkening ocean horizon, haunted by questions she hadn't dared to voice, words she wished she'd said, and love she'd mistakenly believed would always remain by her side. Her heart carried the weight of words unspoken, of apologies unheard, and the soft, relentless ticking of her grandmother's antique clock seemed to mock her hesitancy, reminding her always of lost chances and quiet choices made in fear. Standing there, the sea breeze softly brushing her hair, Beth silently wondered, have you ever looked around at the peacefulness of your life and realized it's just an illusion? The morning sunlight streamed gently through the large bay window of Chapters and Coffee, bathing the worn wooden floorboards and well-loved armchairs in soft gold. Beth moved quietly through the familiar space, arranging fresh pastries behind the counter and gently flipping the closed sign to open, letting in the comforting aroma of salty sea air mixed with freshly ground coffee. She savored these quiet mornings. They offered moments of predictable calm, allowing her to momentarily forget the quiet ache still lingering from Nathan's abrupt departure. She had just settled behind the counter, absently tracing a finger along the rim of her favorite porcelain coffee mug when Emily burst into the shop, breathless from the crisp morning air, her chestnut curls bouncing energetically around her flushed face. Beth, I found something strange while tidying up last night. There's a letter. Emily hesitated, clearly unsure if she should continue, her youthful face softened by concern. Beth felt a small, unexplained flutter of anxiety in her chest. A letter? From whom? Emily reached into her bag and produced a simple cream-colored envelope, slightly crumpled, Nathan's unmistakable handwriting sprawled elegantly across the front. Beth. Her fingers trembled lightly as she accepted it, a subtle tremor hidden carefully behind her composed expression. It felt suddenly heavier in her hands than any paper should, a small, delicate thing carrying enormous, unknown weight. "Thank you, Emily," she murmured softly, eyes fixed intently on the familiar curves of her own name, each letter feeling like a quiet, urgent plea. As Emily stepped respectfully away, sensing the intimacy of the moment, Beth found herself moving almost automatically toward the worn velvet armchair in the far corner, a space often reserved for quiet reading. She sank down slowly, heart beating unevenly, her breath catching in her throat as she carefully tore open the envelope. The letter was brief, the ink smudged slightly by the careful weight of Nathan's hand. "Beth, I'm leaving. Not because I stopped loving you, but because I still do. I wish I could have stayed, could have found the courage to tell you the whole truth. But I'm doing this because I love you too much to let you watch me fall apart. Forgive me if you can." Beth's vision blurred, the neat letters swimming briefly before refocusing into sharp, painful clarity. She clutched the letter tightly, heart aching with a mix of confusion, sorrow, and an aching desire to understand. Beth remained motionless, the gentle hum of customers entering and the soft clinking of cups around her becoming distant murmurs, barely registering in her consciousness. Her thoughts spiraled back to every conversation, every small silence they'd shared, desperately searching for signs she might have missed, for subtle cries for help masked beneath Nathan's calm exterior. Guilt rose thickly in her throat, heavy and bitter, mingling painfully with regret as she recalled their last, hurried exchange. The quiet tension, his eyes filled with an unspoken apology she had failed to fully understand. She folded the letter gently, fingers brushing tenderly across. The paper, now creased from her anxious grip, her gaze drifted unconsciously toward the far end of the store, where Nathan used to sit on rainy afternoons, quietly absorbed in a book, a faint smile playing across his lips. How had she missed the quiet shadows gathering in his eyes, the silent turmoil hidden behind his thoughtful demeanor? Her mind raced to his mother, a gentle, reserved woman who had always welcomed Beth warmly. Perhaps she knew something, some crucial piece of the puzzle Nathan had intentionally hidden from Beth. The realization brought a sharp urgency, propelling her from the chair before her doubts could restrain her. She slipped quietly toward the back office, a small private nook cluttered with paperwork, books, and memories. Shutting the door softly behind her, she hesitated briefly before reaching for her phone, her pulse quickening with each hurried digit dialed. The phone rang softly, steadily, a rhythmic echo matching the unsteady beat of her heart, until finally, Nathan's mother's gentle voice broke through the silence, familiar and comforting despite the underlying tension. "Hello, Beth, dear, is everything all right?" Beth's words caught in her throat, her carefully prepared questions suddenly insufficient. I found a letter from Nathan," she began hesitantly, her voice trembling lightly, betraying her attempt at calm. "He said something about protecting me, about falling apart, but I don't understand. Please, do you know what's happening?" There was a heavy pause, a silence filled with a mother's quiet sorrow. Then softly, carefully, she spoke words that deepened Beth's fears, shaking the fragile stability she'd clung to. "Oh, Beth, he didn't want you to find out this way. Nathan's been sick for a while. He's afraid of repeating his father's mistakes, afraid of hurting you, of becoming someone you'd pity instead of love." Beth sank heavily into her chair, heart fracturing quietly beneath the weight of this truth, suddenly understanding just how deeply she'd misunderstood everything. Days after the phone call, Beth moved through her life as though underwater, each step slow and deliberate, each sound muffled and distant. Nathan's revelation weighed heavily on her, a quiet yet profound sadness that seeped into every corner of her heart, reshaping everything she'd known about their relationship. She found herself replaying his words, the lines of his hastily written note becoming permanently etched into her memory. She wandered into the small kitchen of her home, now achingly empty, pulling open cabinets and drawers filled with mundane things, tea bags, ceramic mugs, and unopened boxes of cookies Nathan had brought home on quiet afternoons. Everything around her bore subtle reminders of him, tiny threads woven intricately through her daily routine. She reached out unconsciously for his favorite mug, chipped slightly along its handle, running her finger lightly over the familiar imperfection. Suddenly overcome, she wondered bitterly if love was always like this. Fragments of joy overshadowed by quiet, creeping grief. Driven by an impulse she couldn't quite explain, Beth found herself sorting through old photographs, boxes of half-forgotten mementos, and books filled with Nathan's annotations, small handwritten notes tucked into margins, quietly voicing thoughts he'd never said aloud. She paused when a single book slipped from her grasp, falling open onto the floor, its pages fluttering gently. Nestled between them was a small photograph she had never seen before, slightly faded at the edges, a snapshot clearly taken years earlier. Nathan stood beside a lake, younger, his smile broad yet somehow wistful, holding the hand of a woman Beth didn't recognize, a slender, dark-haired figure whose eyes bore a haunting resemblance to Nathan's own. Her heart tightened with uncertainty and dread as she turned the photograph over, finding Nathan's handwriting on the back, neat and precise. "Mom and I, the year before we lost him." Beth stared at the words, realization slowly sinking into her consciousness. Nathan had rarely spoken about his family, mentioning his father only in passing, always with an air of guarded sorrow she'd never questioned deeply enough. Now, his mother's vague reference to Nathan fearing he would repeat his father's mistakes made painful, heartbreaking sense. She had always assumed it meant abandonment or divorce, something she'd experienced firsthand. But now the reality was clearer and far more devastating. Nathan had watched his father deteriorate, consumed by illness, becoming someone who brought pain instead of love, sorrow instead of comfort. A quiet, burning shame filled her as she recognized her mistake, the assumptions she'd made, the conversations she'd avoided out of fear or awkwardness. Nathan had been trying desperately to spare her from the very suffering that had shaped his own childhood, the silent helplessness of watching someone you love slowly slip away. And instead of offering comfort, she'd allowed fear to guide her, avoiding the difficult questions that might have allowed him the freedom to confide, to heal. Her breath caught sharply in her throat as she carefully tucked the photograph back, between the pages, gently closing the book as though sealing away the revelation, though its truth had already settled deeply within her. The room around her seemed impossibly quiet, holding its breath, waiting for her next move, and she felt a profound sense of urgency rise within her chest. "What else have I misunderstood?" she whispered softly, the question hanging heavy in the empty room. In the stillness that followed, Beth found herself reflecting on her own fears, the quiet walls she'd built around herself to avoid precisely this kind of heartache. For years, she'd believed strength meant shielding herself from vulnerability, avoiding painful truths rather than facing them openly. She realized now, bitterly, that her cautious nature, carefully nurtured after her divorce, had inadvertently created barriers, not just protecting her from harm, but isolating her from genuine intimacy, from understanding fully the people she most cared about. Unable to bear the oppressive quiet of her house any longer, Beth slipped out the front door, drawn by the comforting rhythm of the ocean waves breaking softly against the shoreline. The familiar salty breeze brushed gently across her face, mingling with the faint chill of early autumn, wrapping her in the soothing, melancholy embrace of twilight. She followed the winding path down to the small cove that had always been her private refuge, the place she and Nathan had spent countless quiet afternoons, lost in books, soft laughter, and whispered dreams. As she stepped carefully across the sand, she noticed the fading footprints of earlier visitors, each soon to be erased by the tide, ephemeral and fragile. much like the life she'd carefully tried to hold on to. The sun hovered low, bathing the horizon in shades of burnt orange and violet, colors bleeding gently into one another, reminding her of how easily joy and sorrow could blend into something both beautiful and heartbreaking. Beth sat quietly on an old driftwood log, pulling her cardigan tighter around herself, as though shielding her heart from further hurt. She stared out at the endless expanse of ocean, her thoughts drifting inevitably back to Nathan, the painful truths he'd tried so carefully to hide from her. Had he truly believed she would love him less if she knew the depth of his suffering, the quiet battles he'd fought alone? The thought filled her with a profound sorrow, mixed now with an unexpected determination. She couldn't change the past, couldn't take back the unspoken words or missed opportunities, but perhaps she could still offer Nathan the understanding he'd silently longed for. As darkness slowly fell, stars began to punctuate the velvet sky, each a tiny, distant reminder of hope, gentle yet resilient. She reached instinctively for her phone, fingers trembling slightly, and without hesitation typed out a simple message, a bridge toward reconciliation, toward honesty and forgiveness. She wrote carefully, deliberately, "Nathan, I know about your father. I'm sorry I didn't see the truth sooner. Please, let's talk. Let's not repeat the past by running from each other." Beth stared at the glowing screen, her thumb hovering uncertainly over the send button. Her breath quickened slightly, heart beating unevenly, flooded by sudden doubt. Would he even respond? Could words now, after so much silence, truly bridge the space between them? Or was this just another painful illusion born from her own desperation? Yet, even as these doubts surfaced, another, quieter voice within her whispered gently, reminding her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but rather the willingness to face it openly, honestly, despite uncertainty. With a deep, shuddering breath, Beth finally tapped send, releasing her carefully guarded heart into the unknown, into the possibility, however faint, of healing, redemption, and perhaps even love reclaimed. She lowered her phone slowly, watching as the waves erased the last visible traces of footsteps from the shore, leaving the sand smooth, untouched, waiting silently for new beginnings. She never expected the truth would begin with a call she didn't even know how to make. In the days following her message to Nathan, Beth found herself suspended in a delicate state of waiting, her life caught between hope and resignation. Each notification on her phone sent a brief rush of expectation through her chest, quickly followed by an inevitable, quiet disappointment. Nathan had not responded, and the silence grew heavier with each passing hour, a quiet ache settling deeply into her heart. To distract herself, she buried her focus in the familiar routine of the bookstore, pouring her energy into organizing shelves and preparing steaming cups of coffee for regular patrons. Yet even the comfort of routine failed to completely erase Nathan's absence from her mind. Every quiet corner, every book recommendation he had once offered to customers, and every familiar gesture now painfully emphasized what was missing from her life. On a particularly slow afternoon, while reorganizing the classics shelf, Jane, Austen novels lined neatly alongside worn editions of Hemingway, she felt a quiet shadow cast across the floor, followed immediately by a gentle, almost hesitant knock against the wood frame of the doorway. Turning slowly, Beth was startled by the presence of a figure she had not seen in years, standing quietly just inside the entrance. Her heart momentarily faltered as recognition settled over her features. "David?" she asked softly, disbelief coloring her voice. He smiled slightly, offering a nod of quiet acknowledgement. "Hello, Beth. It's been a while." It had been 6 years since their last conversation, since the careful, quiet ending of their marriage. They had parted amicably, neither holding onto bitterness, yet both silently aware of the careful distance they maintained afterward. His unexpected reappearance sent a quiet ripple of surprise through her carefully managed composure. "What brings you back to Portville?" she asked gently, taking a tentative step toward him. Work, actually. David replied quietly, stepping further into the store and glancing around appreciatively. I'm working with the local historical society, writing about the town's maritime history. He paused, eyes softening with a subtle warmth as they lingered briefly on Beth. I had a feeling I'd find you here. You've always belonged among stories. A quiet, bittersweet smile touched Beth's lips as memories surfaced gently, filling the space between them with an unspoken familiarity. How long will you be here? A few weeks, maybe longer. I'm staying at the old inn, David said quietly, pausing with a quiet uncertainty, as though waiting to gauge her reaction. Maybe we could catch up sometime if you'd like. Beth hesitated. Briefly, torn between cautious self-preservation and the unexpected comfort his familiar presence offered. Yet the ache left by Nathan's absence, the quiet loneliness of her recent days, gently nudged her toward accepting. I'd like that, she murmured softly, feeling strangely comforted by the simple act of reconnecting with someone who had once been central to her life. Their first meeting was quiet, careful, a gentle testing of the waters over coffee at a local cafe. Gradually, the conversation shifted easily from polite small talk into more sincere exchanges, dredging up memories of their shared history. Soft laughter at inside jokes, gentle reflections on happier times, and quiet confessions of the things they'd learned since parting. As days turned into a comfortable pattern of shared meals and quiet walks by the harbor, Beth began to sense a quiet shift within herself. A gradual thawing of something she hadn't fully realized had become frozen. One afternoon, as they walked along the docks under the gentle autumn sun, David paused, leaning lightly against a weathered railing. You know, Beth, it's strange. When we were together, I never realized how afraid we both were. Beth glanced at him, a quiet vulnerability shining in his familiar eyes. Afraid of what? He smiled faintly, sadness mingling gently with nostalgia. Of everything, really. Afraid of hurting each other, of saying the wrong thing, of admitting we didn't know how to love without conditions. His voice softened further, eyes turning toward the distant horizon. I think that's why we let each other go so easily. We were more afraid of holding too tightly and losing everything. Beth felt a quiet ache tighten in her chest, recognizing the truth in his words. Do you ever wonder if things could have been different? She asked softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. David smiled gently, warmly, without bitterness. Sometimes. But more often, I find myself grateful we parted when we did. We gave each other a chance to find something more real, even if we didn't fully understand it then. Beth's heart stirred with a complex mix of gratitude and sorrow, recognizing the wisdom in his quiet reflection. They walked quietly onward, the silence comfortable yet heavy with contemplation. Later, alone again in her quiet cottage, Beth pondered David's words deeply. His insights gently illuminated her relationship with Nathan in a new, painfully honest light. Nathan, like David, had chosen silence and distance over vulnerability. But unlike her marriage, Nathan's departure left no space for gentle conversation, no room for understanding or reconciliation, just aching uncertainty. Beth realized with a quiet, startling clarity that perhaps the greatest mistake she'd made with Nathan was not expressing openly what she truly felt. Her quiet fears, her guarded heart, had contributed silently to the growing chasm between them, and now she faced the same quiet loneliness that had driven her to retreat so often before. She sat alone, shadows of twilight lengthening softly across the wooden floor, a quiet turmoil building steadily within her. David's presence had gently reminded her of what genuine honesty required, courage she had not yet fully embraced. Now she faced an internal crossroads, torn between the safety of silence, of careful solitude, and the risk of speaking truths that could either mend or irrevocably break what remained of her fragile connection with Nathan. With quiet resolve, Beth reached again for her phone, her heart beating erratically as she saw the screen remained blank. Still no reply from Nathan. The quiet emptiness it represented felt suddenly suffocating. She knew now that silence had only widened the gap, and her only path forward required painful honesty, regardless of the outcome. Yet even as determination strengthened within her chest, quiet doubt whispered softly, insistently, "Can you bear the truth if it leaves you alone again?" In the quiet solitude of her living room that evening, Beth found herself drawn again to the collection of letters Nathan had left behind, each carefully folded and tucked into a box she'd intentionally avoided since his departure. Her fingers brushed gently across the delicate paper, as if touching something fragile enough to shatter at the slightest pressure. With cautious reverence, she unfolded one letter at random, her breath catching softly as she absorbed Nathan's neat, careful handwriting, lines written during happier days that now seemed impossibly distant. "Beth, sometimes I watch you move through the bookstore, absorbed completely in your world of books and dreams, and I find myself wishing I could always shield you from pain. I know you've built walls to protect your heart, but I wish you'd let me inside them completely. Loving you feels like standing outside a beautiful house, seeing warmth and light through the windows, yet never quite finding the courage to knock on the door." Beth's heart tightened painfully at his quiet confession, suddenly seeing clearly how her fear of vulnerability had not only isolated her, but had also silently wounded Nathan. She folded the letter again slowly, fingers trembling lightly as she placed it back among its companions, each filled with quietly voiced affection she'd never fully recognized. The following afternoon, seeking distraction from the heaviness that lingered at home, Beth wandered again to the shoreline, feet sinking gently into soft sand, each wave softly whispering its timeless reassurance. Lost in thought, she didn't immediately notice David approaching quietly, his figure silhouetted softly against the late afternoon sun. "You look as if you're carrying the weight of the world," he observed gently, joining her on the sand, keeping a respectful distance, his voice quiet yet warm. Beth managed a small, bittersweet smile, feeling suddenly grateful for his familiar, comforting presence. "Maybe not the whole world," she admitted quietly. "Just my own mistakes and regrets." David's eyes softened, understanding clear in his expression. "It's strange how clearly we see our mistakes afterward. I've learned regrets only multiply when we choose silence over honesty." She met his gaze, noticing again the quiet sincerity that had always defined him, even when their marriage was ending. "Did you ever regret letting me go, David?" He considered carefully before answering, his voice gentle yet sure. "I regretted that we never fully opened our hearts, but letting you go, no. You deserved more than I could offer at that time." His honesty settled around her softly, comforting, rather than painful. She felt a quiet admiration for his courage, recognizing her own need to find similar strength within herself. That evening, sitting alone beneath the soft glow of her reading lamp, Beth felt an unexpected wave of clarity and determination wash through her. She reached for her notebook, a simple, leather-bound volume she'd once intended for personal reflections but had rarely used. With quiet urgency, she began writing, each word flowing steadily onto the page like a release of held breath, a confession she knew she needed to share openly with Nathan. "Nathan, I've always been afraid. Afraid of being left. Afraid of pain. Afraid of loving too much. But now I'm even more afraid of silence, of never letting you know how deeply you've touched my life. I wish I'd been braver sooner, but maybe bravery means admitting how deeply flawed and frightened I've been. If there's still a chance for honesty between us, I hope you'll let me in. Not to fix things, not to pretend nothing happened, but simply to understand each other before it's too late." She finished, hands trembling slightly, staring at her words, each letter carrying the weight of her unguarded heart. Her breathing steadied as resolve settled within her, strengthening with quiet certainty. She knew that sending this would risk everything, but silence had proven a far greater risk. Carefully, deliberately, she typed each word into her phone, fingers hovering momentarily over the screen before pressing send, feeling strangely lighter, even as anxiety quickened her heartbeat. For hours afterward, Beth lay awake in the soft darkness, phone resting silently beside her, waiting for a response she wasn't entirely sure would come. Her heart moved between hope and quiet resignation, each moment stretching impossibly long, filled with the aching uncertainty of having finally bared her true self. As dawn approached, bathing her bedroom in gentle hues of lavender and pale gold, Beth drifted briefly into a restless sleep, startled awake minutes later by the soft chime of a notification, a sound she'd both dreaded and yearned to hear. Heart pounding unevenly, she reached for her phone, pulse quickening as she saw Nathan's name illuminated softly on the screen. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened his message, eyes scanning his words with cautious hope and quiet dread. "Beth, your honesty is what I've needed more than anything. I'm sorry for running, sorry for hiding. If you're willing, please, meet me. Let's speak face to face. There's still so much I need to tell you." Relief and anxiety rushed through her simultaneously, tears gathering silently in the corners of her eyes as she reread his words, comforted by the openness he finally offered, yet frightened by what remained unspoken between them. She knew their conversation might bring answers, healing, or further heartbreak, perhaps all three intertwined inseparably, but now silence no longer held power over them. Beth sat quietly, breathing deeply to steady herself, knowing a decision now loomed clearly before her. Would she choose the safety of solitude she'd always known, or risk her heart once more, fully aware of potential loss? She looked toward the gentle morning sunlight filtering softly through her window, casting its reassuring glow across her small, familiar room, illuminating the quiet corners of her life. A quiet certainty settled within her. This was her moment of courage, a moment to finally choose vulnerability over fear. With quiet resolve, she typed a simple reply. "Tell me when and where. I'll be there." She pressed send decisively, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, feeling simultaneously liberated and deeply vulnerable. Yet even in uncertainty, Beth felt a quiet, powerful sense of freedom. Freedom from silence, freedom from regrets that might otherwise have quietly defined the rest of her life. As her heart began to calm, Beth closed her eyes briefly, silently, hoping this courage wouldn't fail her when she needed it most. The quiet sound of waves rolling gently in the distance seemed to echo softly through her home, offering reassurance and a gentle promise of beginnings amidst endings. She knew one thing clearly now. Silence could no longer define her story. The cafe Nathan had chosen sat quietly at the edge of a neighboring seaside village, far enough from Portville to offer anonymity, yet close enough to feel oddly familiar. Beth arrived first, nerves tightening quietly in her chest, heart beating unevenly beneath the soft fabric of her sweater. The place had a cozy, understated charm. Old wooden tables, mismatched chairs, delicate vintage porcelain cups hanging on racks above the counter, and quiet jazz music played softly in the background, gently comforting her frayed nerves. She chose a corner table near a large window, offering an expansive view of the restless ocean. The gentle waves rolled in steady rhythm against the shoreline, reassuring yet melancholic, mirroring her own uncertain emotions. She sat quietly, cradling a warm cup of tea between her hands, eyes fixed on the shifting sea, thoughts tangled anxiously between hope and dread. When the bell above the cafe door jingled softly, signaling Nathan's arrival, Beth's heart jumped, her breath catching momentarily. She turned, carefully masking her anxiety behind practiced composure. But even so, her pulse quickened sharply at the sight of him. Familiar, yet somehow changed, his face slightly thinner, eyes shadowed gently with fatigue, though they warmed, considerably upon seeing her. "Beth," Nathan said softly, voice tentative yet warmly familiar. He hesitated briefly, then approached carefully, taking the seat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke, allowing the silence to stretch gently, filled with quiet uncertainty and unspoken questions. Finally, Beth found her voice, gentle yet direct, softly breaking through the silence. "Nathan, I'm glad you agreed to meet. There's so much we left unsaid." Nathan's eyes softened with quiet regret, his expression both vulnerable and guarded. "I know. I've spent countless hours imagining this conversation, wondering how to tell you the truth, and each time I hesitated, fearing it would only hurt you more." "Your silence hurt more," Beth replied gently, her voice steady despite the quiet trembling inside her chest. "I'd rather have painful honesty than comforting silence. Silence creates distance, and distance can feel unbearable." Nathan nodded slowly, absorbing her quiet courage, visibly moved. He reached out, hesitating briefly before carefully placing his hand over hers. A simple gesture, yet powerfully symbolic of the quiet step they were taking toward understanding. "I've spent my life afraid, Beth. Afraid I'd become like my father. Afraid illness would define me. That eventually, you'd see me differently. And that fear controlled me, forced me to run instead of facing it." Beth squeezed his hand gently, comfortingly, her eyes filling softly with compassion. "Nathan, don't you realize? You can't protect someone from love, from grief, from loss. We're all fragile, but that's what makes us human, what makes love real." He looked away briefly, toward the rolling waves outside the window, quiet sorrow shadowing his features. "I watched my mother lose herself trying to care for my father as he deteriorated. He became someone she pitied, someone who broke her heart every day just by existing. I couldn't bear the thought of becoming that for you." Beth's heart ached quietly at his confession, finally understanding the depth of his fears, the painful legacy of love and loss that had quietly shaped his actions. She reached up gently, cupping his cheek in a tender gesture, forcing him to look at her fully, her voice quiet yet firm. "You're not your father, Nathan, and I'm not your mother. Our story doesn't have to repeat theirs." Nathan closed, his eyes briefly, leaning into her touch, releasing a quiet breath of relief mixed with lingering uncertainty. "I want to believe that. But the truth is, Beth, I'm already ill. I have a condition, a degenerative neurological disorder. It's slow, manageable now, but eventually it'll worsen. And there's no cure, only a long road of uncertainty. I couldn't ask you to walk it with me, not without knowing fully what that meant." Beth sat quietly, absorbing his words, feeling their weight sink deeply into her heart. She felt grief, not for herself, but for Nathan, who had quietly carried this burden alone, allowing fear to isolate him, stealing precious moments of connection and understanding. She felt sadness, regret, and above all, a quiet determination to stand beside him, whatever that meant, because love had never promised certainty, only the chance to face uncertainty together. Her voice trembled slightly, her emotions finally breaking through her careful composure. "Nathan, when you left, you chose silence. You thought you were protecting me, but what you did was take away my choice, my chance to love you fully, knowing everything. Don't you see? Love isn't about protecting someone from suffering. It's about choosing to face that suffering together, openly, honestly." Nathan's eyes filled quietly with tears, unspoken words rising visibly in his throat, gratitude mingling with regret. "Beth, She shook her head gently, interrupting softly, her eyes bright with quiet tears of her own. "Don't apologize, Nathan. Just promise me that from now on, you'll never choose silence again, no matter how difficult the truth is. Promise me that we'll face whatever comes together, honestly." Nathan nodded quietly, voice soft yet firm with newfound determination. I promise. No more silence, Beth. For a moment, silence settled again between them, though this time it was gentle, filled not with uncertainty, but quiet intimacy, a fragile, hopeful beginning. Beth knew clearly this was only the first step on a long, uncertain road ahead, but at least now they walked it together, armed with truth and courage, no longer imprisoned by quiet fears or half-truths. Beth squeezed Nathan's hand again, comforted deeply by the warmth and strength she found in his quiet grasp. Each silently understanding they had finally crossed the threshold toward genuine honesty. Yet quietly, a question lingered heavily within her chest, unspoken yet painfully real. Could their newfound honesty survive the reality of what lay ahead, or had it arrived too late? They spent the remainder of the afternoon quietly walking along the shore, side by side, yet slightly hesitant, each unsure exactly how to bridge the careful distance they'd both so cautiously maintained. Nathan's revelation hovered quietly. Between them, heavy yet oddly liberating, as though by finally speaking his truth, he'd released them both from silence's oppressive grip. Occasionally, he would pause, staring quietly out at the endless horizon, the vastness of the sea reminding them both of the uncertain path they faced. Beth's heart felt lighter, yet beneath that initial relief, an undercurrent of quiet fear lingered stubbornly. She knew honesty was only the beginning. Facing the reality of Nathan's illness meant embracing profound vulnerability, opening herself fully to potential loss. And yet, for the first time, the fear seemed manageable, even worth embracing, because silence had proven far more damaging. That evening, as the sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the sand, Nathan gently reached for Beth's hand once more, their fingers interlocking naturally. Comforting despite lingering uncertainty, she glanced up at him, noticing the soft vulnerability now reflected openly in his gaze. I've missed you terribly, he confessed quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Every day without you felt endless, incomplete. Her throat tightened softly at his quiet sincerity, eyes filling once again with gentle tears. I missed you too, Nathan, more than I thought possible. They stood silently together for several moments, the gentle rhythm of waves softly filling the quiet space between them. Yet even amidst the comfort of reconnection, Beth felt an inevitable tension, the quiet truth that love alone might not be enough to shield them from the struggles ahead. But perhaps love wasn't meant to shield, only to give courage, a quiet strength to endure uncertainty together. When Nathan drove her back to Portville later that night, the familiar streets felt strangely foreign to Beth, as though their careful illusions of comfort and safety had now been irreversibly altered. Nathan stopped outside her cottage, turning slightly toward her, his face partially shadowed in the soft glow of the street lamp. Beth, he began softly, his voice heavy with quiet emotion. I won't ask you to commit to something you're not ready for. I understand what this means, what it could cost you. Nathan, stop, she interrupted gently, reaching over to cup his face once again, quiet determination steadying her trembling voice. I don't need protection, and I don't want easy promises. I just want honesty day by day. Promise me we'll face this openly, without hiding. Nathan's eyes softened deeply, moved beyond words. Finally he nodded, his voice quietly certain. I promise, Beth. Every day, every moment I'll be truthful, even when it's hard. As he drove away, Beth stood quietly on her porch, watching until his car disappeared into darkness. The quiet stillness of the night settled around her once more, familiar yet subtly changed. She knew the hardest conversations still lay ahead, the reality of Nathan's illness demanding courage she hadn't fully tested yet. But at least they had broken. The silence shattered the walls built of quiet fears and careful distance. Stepping into her quiet house, Beth felt suddenly overwhelmed by memories of loneliness and regret that had lingered too long within these walls. Yet tonight, something felt distinctly different. Each shadowed corner no longer felt oppressive, but rather gently reminded her of the steps she'd finally taken toward openness and courage. She wandered slowly through her home, pausing quietly at familiar corners, gently touching items Nathan had left behind. The chipped coffee mug, a sweater he'd forgotten on the sofa, a novel bookmarked halfway through. Each object now carried quiet reassurance rather than sadness, small promises of hope rather than lingering regret. Eventually, Beth found herself standing before her bedroom window, gazing out quietly toward the distant sea once again, stars softly illuminating the gentle waves. In that quiet moment, she recognized clearly that loving Nathan fully would mean embracing pain alongside joy, sorrow intertwined permanently with happiness. Yet this quiet truth no longer frightened her as it once had. Instead, it felt reassuringly real, deeply human. Yet even as acceptance and calm washed gently over her, the quiet question lingered stubbornly, persistently within her chest. Could she truly handle what lay ahead? Would courage and honesty be enough to sustain them? Or was love, however deep, destined to break quietly beneath life's harsher truths? She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a deep breath, feeling the cool night air softly whispering against her skin. Perhaps answers would never be fully certain, she realized. Perhaps courage lay simply in the willingness to face uncertainty openly, honestly, moment by moment. As she opened her eyes once more, Beth noticed her reflection gently, mirrored in the window glass, softened by moonlight. Fragile yet determined, quietly hopeful despite uncertainty. She whispered softly into the night air, as though reassuring herself. One step at a time, Beth. That's all love ever promised. Yet, even as she spoke these quiet words of comfort, a deep unease lingered stubbornly, gently reminding her of reality's harsher truths. She understood clearly now that love, however bravely embraced, could never promise certainty, only the quiet courage to face uncertainty without silence. And as she finally turned away from the window, gently switching off the lamp beside her bed, the quiet darkness felt less lonely, yet infinitely more complex. Love had broken her silence, forced her into honesty. But would it be enough, or had this quiet revelation come too late? Beth climbed softly beneath her blankets, eyes staring gently into darkness, uncertainty settling once again within her. Chest, gentle, fragile, impossible to ignore. What if honesty came too late? She whispered softly to the empty room, her heart quietly aching with a question she couldn't yet answer. The following days passed in a quiet blur of emotional numbness, punctuated only by brief, intense moments of sorrow that rose unexpectedly, threatening to overwhelm Beth each time she remembered Nathan's unsent letter. She felt caught within a painful loop of quiet guilt, regret, and self-blame, endlessly questioning whether her silence had cost them precious time that honesty might have salvaged. Nathan, unaware she had discovered his letter, continued quietly, navigating his illness with quiet bravery, each careful smile and gentle reassurance piercing Beth's heart with subtle intensity. Their evenings, once filled with comfortable intimacy, now carried an underlying tension, unspoken regrets and quiet fears hovering carefully between them, too delicate to touch openly, yet impossible to fully ignore. One particularly difficult evening. As Nathan sat silently on Beth's sofa, eyes fixed thoughtfully on the quiet fire crackling gently in the hearth, she watched him carefully from across the room. The fire's gentle glow illuminated his features softly, revealing quiet exhaustion hidden beneath careful composure, shadows lingering gently beneath his eyes. Her heart ached quietly, painfully aware that his silence wasn't avoidance, but rather a protective habit he'd learned from years of quietly bearing his struggles alone. Feeling suddenly overwhelmed, Beth quietly stood, stepping softly toward the small radio tucked discreetly on a shelf, its presence forgotten until this moment. She switched it on, a gentle jazz melody softly filling the quiet space between them, hoping the music might offer comfort, distraction, or at least mask their quiet sorrow. Instead, the soft melody felt painfully poignant, a quiet echo of past moments, happy evenings spent quietly together, sharing gentle laughter and unspoken affection, now distant memories. She returned silently to the sofa, carefully taking Nathan's hand, gently intertwining their fingers. He glanced softly toward her, eyes quietly grateful yet filled with quiet concern, sensing clearly the weight of her unspoken feelings. "Nathan," Beth finally whispered, voice trembling gently with restrained emotion. "I found one of your letters, an unsent one. The one about your fears, your illness, about not wanting to burden me." Nathan's eyes widened quietly, briefly startled, then softened deeply with gentle resignation. "Beth, I never meant for you to read it. Not like that." Her voice trembled slightly as she replied softly, "But I'm glad I did. It opened my eyes." "Nathan, all these years, all this silence between us, it was meant to protect, but it only hurt more deeply." He nodded quietly, looking down at their joined hands, breathing carefully to steady himself. "I know now. Silence was my biggest mistake. I thought I was saving you from pain. But I was wrong." Tears formed quietly in Beth's eyes, blurring her vision momentarily. "We both were. I was silent too, Nathan, too afraid of losing you to admit how deeply I cared. And now, I realize silence already stole what I feared losing most." Nathan gently squeezed her hand, the gesture quietly comforting, even amidst shared sorrow. "Maybe it's not too late, Beth. We can't change what's lost, but we can decide how we face what's left." She nodded softly, appreciating his quiet courage, even as her heart quietly ached with regret. Yet deep inside, Beth questioned whether they truly had enough strength left, whether courage alone could withstand the quiet reality of inevitable decline. The question lingered quietly within her chest, unanswered yet stubbornly persistent. Later that night, after Nathan had quietly left for home, Beth wandered slowly through her empty house, heart heavy with quiet sorrow. She paused gently beside the clock, its rhythmic ticking a constant, quiet reminder of time slipping steadily away. Every sound echoed painfully, each tick softly resonating within her chest, marking quietly lost moments and missed chances. Her gaze drifted gently to the window again, where moonlight softly illuminated the quiet street outside, reflecting off wet pavement like quiet tears of regret. She realized suddenly, clearly, that this house, her sanctuary of solitude and silence, had now become a painful monument to lost opportunities and quiet fears she'd allowed to define her. With quiet, trembling steps, Beth moved softly toward her desk, retrieving the unsent letter once more, feeling again its fragile weight between her fingers. She unfolded it carefully, reading each quietly devastating word, allowing herself to fully feel the sorrow she'd tried so desperately to suppress. Her tears flowed quietly yet relentlessly, each one carrying quiet regret and helpless grief for the love she feared might now be irreparably damaged by silence. She lifted the letter gently to her lips, softly kissing the paper, a quiet, sorrowful farewell to the silent fears that had held them captive. "I'm sorry," she whispered softly, barely audible, yet heartbreakingly sincere. "I'm sorry for all the silence, Nathan. For letting fear speak louder than love." With careful reverence, Beth folded the letter once more, gently placing it into her desk drawer. She knew clearly that nothing could fully erase the quiet pain they'd endured, the regret now etched permanently into their story. Yet perhaps, somehow, courage could still offer quiet redemption, not by removing pain, but by openly acknowledging and embracing it. Beth climbed slowly into bed, pulling blankets tightly around her, the weight of her quiet grief settling gently around her shoulders. As she closed her eyes, she quietly wished for strength she wasn't sure existed, for courage she feared might be inadequate. The gentle pattering of rain continued softly outside her window, a quiet lullaby reminding her painfully, yet beautifully, of life's fragility and the quiet courage needed simply to face another day. Lying quietly in darkness, Beth finally whispered a quiet promise, both to Nathan and herself. No more silence. Whatever comes, we face it openly, honestly. Even if it breaks our hearts. Yet, as sleep claimed her gently, she quietly wondered whether her promise had arrived too late. If honesty and courage, though sincere, could truly mend what silence had quietly broken. In the quiet days following her painful realization, Beth found herself navigating life with newfound clarity. Painful, yet liberating. She and Nathan began openly addressing even their smallest fears, exchanging vulnerabilities previously hidden behind careful masks of composure. Each gentle confession offered quiet relief, bringing a subtle healing, though neither truly knew if honesty alone could mend fully the quiet fractures their silence had inflicted. One brisk afternoon, as autumn leaves drifted quietly onto the streets of Portville, Beth received a phone call she hadn't anticipated. Nathan's mother, her voice calm yet tinged with an unusual urgency, quietly requested Beth's presence at her home. Curious yet hesitant, Beth agreed immediately, sensing quietly that something important awaited her. When she arrived, the older woman greeted her warmly yet solemnly, gently guiding her to a small sitting room bathed softly in afternoon sunlight. They sat quietly, the room heavy with an unspoken sense of purpose, before Nathan's mother finally broke the silence, her voice soft yet filled with quiet strength. "Beth, there's something I've held on to for years, something Nathan doesn't know exists," she began carefully, reaching gently toward an antique desk, opening a drawer and withdrawing a carefully preserved envelope. His father left it before he passed. Nathan never knew. I thought it might be too painful, too complicated for him to see. But now, after watching how much pain silence has caused you both, I realize my silence has only continued that hurt. Beth carefully took the envelope, feeling its gentle weight, aged paper fragile beneath her fingers. She glanced questioningly toward Nathan's mother, who nodded softly, encouragingly. Heart beating unevenly, Beth opened it carefully, drawing out a faded handwritten letter, a quiet message from Nathan's father, dated shortly before his passing. The words flowed gently across the paper, tender and filled with regret. Quiet, sorrow woven subtly between each line. My beloved son, Nathan. By the time you read this, I'll likely be gone. My illness having claimed what little strength remains. I write now, not to burden you with sorrow, but to confess a painful truth. For years I believed silence would spare you suffering. I thought hiding my condition would protect your innocence, preserve your happiness. But silence only created distance, stole precious moments we might have shared honestly. I've seen you withdraw, sensing something wrong yet afraid to ask. My silence became your suffering, and for that I am profoundly sorry. Nathan, never let fear dictate your life. Love openly, speak honestly, even when it hurts. Pain shared is lessened, pain hidden only multiplies. If I've taught you nothing, else let this be my lesson. Silence solves nothing. It only steals quietly, relentlessly from those we love most. With all my love forever, Dad. Beth lowered the letter slowly, eyes glistening gently with quiet tears, heart tightening painfully yet deeply moved. Nathan's fears, the desperate attempt to shield her, the careful silence he'd inherited, suddenly held heartbreaking clarity. His father's quiet lesson, learned tragically too late, now echoed poignantly through Nathan's life, through hers, through their shared suffering. Nathan's mother quietly spoke again, voice trembling slightly with emotion. Beth, I thought hiding this letter would protect him. Now I see clearly it was my mistake, a silent burden I should never have carried alone. Nathan deserves to read this, to understand his father fully, to know his struggle was born of misguided love, not abandonment or indifference. Beth gently took the older woman's hand, quietly understanding the depth of courage required to break her silence after so many years. Thank you for trusting me, Beth whispered softly, compassion warming her voice. You were trying to protect him, just as Nathan was trying to protect me. But now, maybe honesty can help heal us all. Nathan's mother nodded gratefully, eyes shining quietly with tears of relief, as though finally releasing the weight she'd silently borne for decades. Please, give Nathan this letter. It belongs to him. And tell him how sorry I am for letting silence steal so much from both of you. Beth gently folded the letter, heart now profoundly aware of the tragic legacy of silence passed silently from father to son. She quietly promised Nathan's mother she would deliver the message, knowing deeply that confronting this final truth could either shatter Nathan completely or finally free him from the quiet fears that had defined his entire life. Yet, even amidst her quiet certainty, Beth felt a gentle unease linger stubbornly. Would the truth, revealed so late, be a gift or yet another painful burden? Beth drove home slowly, heart weighted gently with quiet determination, yet tangled in anxious uncertainty. She carefully rehearsed each word she would say to Nathan, knowing deeply the importance of presenting the letter with the tenderness and honesty it deserved. This fragile piece of his past had quietly shaped so much of his present, silently, influencing his every decision and hesitation. The truth had potential either to set him free or break him further, and that knowledge settled heavily, quietly within her chest. That evening, when Nathan arrived at her cottage, he immediately sensed something different, pausing softly in the doorway as he met Beth's quiet, serious gaze. Beth, is everything all right? He asked gently, concern evident in his softly furrowed brow. She moved toward him slowly, guiding him gently by the hand toward the small sofa. Carefully, deliberately, she withdrew the envelope from her cardigan pocket, holding it gently out to him. Nathan, your mother gave me this letter today. It's from your father. She's carried it all these years, thinking silence would protect you. But silence hasn't protected any of us. It's only caused more pain. Nathan accepted the letter with quiet confusion, his fingers trembling slightly as he unfolded the fragile pages, eyes scanning carefully, breath catching softly as each gentle word reached him. Beth watched silently, her heart aching softly, at the subtle shifts in his expression. Pain, sorrow, and finally a deep, aching understanding that quietly reshaped his entire view of the past. When he finished, he sat silently, staring at the paper, his eyes quietly filled with tears, voice barely above a whisper. All these years I thought he didn't care enough, thought he chose silence out of indifference. But all this time, it was love, misguided but real. My father wasn't abandoning me. He was trying, desperately, to protect me from pain. Beth gently took his hand, offering quiet reassurance through the simple warmth of touch. Nathan, your father's silence became yours. It became ours. But it doesn't have to remain our legacy. Now we understand the price silence exacts, and we can choose differently. Nathan squeezed her hand tightly, his tears quietly releasing years of pent-up sorrow, regret, and misunderstanding. His voice shook slightly as he quietly admitted, Beth, I've been so afraid. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of repeating my father's mistakes. Now I see I've repeated them anyway, in my own quiet way. I let fear decide for me, but no more. You deserve honesty. All of it. Always. Beth nodded gently, feeling deeply moved, tears quietly tracing gentle paths down her own cheeks. "Nathan, we've both let fear control us, allowed silence to dictate our choices. But we still have time. Time to speak honestly, to love openly, even knowing it might hurt. That's real courage, not protecting each other from pain, but facing it together." He met her eyes, quiet gratitude and newfound strength shining clearly in his gaze. "You're right. No more silence. Whatever comes next, Beth, I promise you honesty. From this moment on, our love won't be defined by silence. It will be defined by truth, however difficult." The gentle ticking of the antique clock once again filled the quiet room, its sound no longer oppressive but softly reassuring, marking the quiet, steady passing of moments now filled with honesty, courage, and genuine connection. Beth felt quietly liberated, hopeful yet still aware of the uncertainty that lay ahead. That night, after Nathan had quietly departed, Beth sat thoughtfully alone, reflecting gently on the profound shifts that had occurred in their lives. Truth had indeed arrived painfully late, yet it also offered them a quiet, precious chance to rewrite their story, not by erasing the past, but by choosing how to face the future. She glanced quietly at her phone resting softly beside her, feeling compelled by a gentle impulse to share, to open her experience gently to others who might quietly carry similar burdens. Picking up her phone, she softly typed a quiet yet heartfelt message. "Have you ever carried a silence that shaped your life without realizing it? If so, I'd love to hear your story, your truth. Sometimes sharing our burdens quietly, gently, can help us find healing we didn't know was possible." She posted the message quietly, placing the phone down with gentle satisfaction. She realized then, clearly, that healing required openness, not just with Nathan, but with herself and others. Silence had quietly isolated them, yet now truth was building bridges softly, gently connecting her life with those of strangers whose quiet burdens might mirror her own. Eth understood now, deeply, profoundly, that while honesty might arrive painfully late, it was never truly too late to choose courage over silence, truth over fear. The quiet room around her seemed gently brighter, filled subtly with newfound hope as she softly whispered into the night. "No matter how late truth arrives, it always matters." The gentle ticking of the clock offered quiet agreement, each subtle sound marking new beginnings rather than lost moments, gently guiding her forward with quiet yet unwavering hope. In the quiet weeks that followed, autumn gently gave way to winter in Portville, blanketing the town softly in snow that transformed familiar streets into tranquil landscapes of white, untouched beauty. Beth's cottage, too, embraced this gentle change, soft flurries dancing lightly outside her window, settling quietly onto branches and rooftops, creating a peaceful stillness that mirrored her own newfound calm. Nathan remained a quiet, steady presence in her life, no longer hiding behind careful masks or hesitant silences. Their conversations now were open, honest, gently exploring even the difficult truths they'd long avoided. Each shared fear, each small confession strengthened their quiet bond, transforming their relationship into something deeper, more resilient, even amidst uncertainty. Beth continued receiving gentle messages from strangers, their quiet confessions of hidden fears and silent regrets echoing her own experiences. Each story reminded her gently that pain shared truly was pain lessened, a quiet truth now deeply embedded in her understanding of love and connection. Her quiet courage, softly displayed, inspired others, creating connections forged gently yet powerfully from shared vulnerability. As winter settled more deeply over Portville, bringing shorter days and longer evenings, Beth and Nathan developed quiet routines that nurtured their growing intimacy. They spent gentle evenings by the fire, reading softly to each other or sharing memories now spoken openly, honestly. Each night became a quiet celebration of the courage they had both discovered within themselves. The quiet bravery needed to love without reservation, knowing fully the risks involved. Yet even amidst this newfound closeness, Beth felt the quiet presence of lingering sorrow, a subtle reminder of time lost and choices made too late. Nathan's condition progressed slowly, quietly, each new symptom a gentle yet painful reminder that honesty, though healing, couldn't erase entirely the impact of their earlier silences. One softly snowing evening, Nathan sat quietly beside her, gazing thoughtfully into the dancing flames, his hand resting gently in hers. He spoke softly, his voice carrying quiet acceptance mixed with gentle regret. "Beth, if I could change just one thing, it would be those years of silence, years we can't reclaim." Beth squeezed his hand softly, gently reassuring him. "I know, but those years also taught us something valuable. How deeply silence hurts, how precious honesty is. Without those painful lessons, maybe we wouldn't be sitting here now, speaking openly, sharing everything." Nathan turned quietly toward her, his eyes filled with gentle warmth and quiet gratitude. "You always find hope, Beth, even in regret. That's what I've always loved most about you. Your quiet strength, your ability to see beauty in life's complexities." She smiled softly, warmed deeply by his quiet acknowledgement. "Maybe life's beauty lies precisely in those imperfections, Nathan. In embracing love despite uncertainty, in choosing honesty despite fear. Maybe our story isn't about perfection, but simply about learning to live openly, honestly, moment by moment." Nathan leaned quietly against her shoulder, breathing softly, comforted by her gentle wisdom. Outside, snow continued falling quietly, softly blanketing the earth, erasing imperfections, offering gentle renewal, an apt metaphor for their own quiet journey of love and forgiveness. Over time, as winter slowly released its gentle hold, signs of early spring began quietly appearing around Portville, soft buds on trees, subtle hints of green quietly pushing through thawing earth. Beth found gentle comfort in these quiet symbols of renewal, reminders that life continued even amidst uncertainty and change. One gentle morning in early March, Beth awoke to the soft sound of birds singing quietly outside her window, sunlight streaming gently through sheer curtains. She stepped quietly onto the porch, breathing deeply, savoring the crisp air that carried the faint scent of new beginnings. Nathan joined her quietly moments later, wrapping his arms gently around her, resting his chin softly on her shoulder. "Spring's almost here," he whispered softly, voice hopeful, yet tinged subtly with melancholy. Beth leaned gently into his warmth, quietly cherishing their closeness, even as she acknowledged quietly the fragility of these moments. "Spring always comes eventually, Nathan, even after the harshest winters." He nodded gently, understanding deeply her quiet meaning. Their love, though tested harshly by silence and illness, now felt quietly renewed, not because they'd conquered uncertainty, but because they'd learned quietly to face it honestly together. Yet even as quiet hope blossomed gently within her chest, Beth felt a subtle, lingering sadness, a gentle acknowledgement that some losses could never fully be reclaimed, that healing sometimes meant quietly accepting what couldn't be changed. They stood silently together, breathing softly, absorbing quietly the peaceful stillness around them, each knowing deeply the truth of their quiet love, that it wasn't perfect nor certain, but it was honest, courageous, and deeply real. Nathan finally spoke softly, voice gentle yet certain. "Whatever comes next, Beth, I promise honesty and courage. No matter how difficult, no matter how uncertain, we'll face it together, openly, without silence." Beth turned gently toward him, meeting his quiet gaze, voice softly steady with quiet resolution. Together, Nathan. No more silence. Ever. They stood quietly, softly embracing beneath the gentle warmth of early sunlight. Hearts intertwined quietly yet powerfully by newfound honesty and quiet, enduring hope. As spring gently unfolded around them, Beth and Nathan found quiet comfort in simple shared moments. Morning walks along the harbor, afternoons spent tending the garden, evenings quietly cooking dinner side by side. Life continued softly, unassuming yet deeply cherished, marked by quiet rituals that gently affirmed their commitment to honesty, courage, and love openly expressed. Nathan's condition remained present, a gentle shadow always quietly nearby, but honesty had transformed it from silent burden into shared strength, something they faced openly together. Beth discovered quiet resilience within herself she hadn't fully known existed, learning softly to embrace uncertainty rather than fear it. Each gentle day became a quiet celebration of life, marked subtly by newfound gratitude and tender, unspoken acknowledgement that every moment mattered deeply, precisely because it was fleeting. One mild evening, as twilight gently painted the sky in delicate shades of lavender and pink, Beth and Nathan sat quietly on the porch, sharing soft laughter and gentle stories from their day. Nathan paused quietly, gazing thoughtfully into the fading sunset, voice softly reflective. "Beth, do you ever think about how differently things might have been had we been brave sooner, if honesty hadn't arrived so late?" Beth considered, carefully, voice gentle, yet filled with quiet certainty. "I used to think about it constantly, regretting lost time, grieving missed chances. But lately, I've realized something important. Maybe we needed those years of silence and regret to understand the true value of honesty, of courage. Maybe love, real love, needs those imperfections and quiet mistakes to become something deeper, stronger." Nathan smiled softly, deeply moved, gently squeezing her hand. "You have this gentle way of making even pain seem worthwhile, Beth." She laughed quietly, softly shaking her head. "Not worthwhile exactly, just necessary maybe. Pain teaches us things nothing else can. Silence taught us honesty's true value, taught us how to love openly despite uncertainty. That's something." He nodded gently, quietly agreeing, his expression tender yet tinged softly with melancholy. "I wish we'd learned sooner. Yet even now I'm grateful. Our love might be late, imperfect, but it's honest, and that feels more meaningful than anything." They sat quietly, hand in hand, absorbing the gentle beauty of evening around them, each silently understanding that their story wasn't about easy resolutions or perfect endings. It was simply about the quiet courage to keep choosing honesty, love, and hope, even amidst uncertainty. Over the coming weeks, their gentle routine continued softly, the days lengthening, warmth returning gently to Portville. Beth found quiet solace in Nathan's consistent presence, understanding deeply that love wasn't found in grand gestures, but in quiet, steadfast moments of shared vulnerability. Yet she knew clearly that Nathan's illness would someday change. Things irrevocably, a quiet truth neither denied, each softly accepting its gentle inevitability with quiet dignity. One soft morning, as early summer began gently brushing warmth across Portville, Nathan quietly asked Beth to accompany him somewhere important, a quiet spot he'd long avoided. They drove slowly to a secluded lakeside, gently shaded by ancient trees, serene water reflecting quiet sunlight. Nathan stepped softly toward the lake, breathing deeply, eyes quietly reflective. "My father used to bring me here," Nathan spoke quietly, voice softly nostalgic. "It was his favorite place. After he passed, I couldn't come back. Silence and fear stole even this from me." Beth moved gently beside him, taking his hand quietly, offering silent support as he continued softly. "But now, thanks to you, Beth, this place feels different. It doesn't carry the weight of silence anymore. It feels free, honest. Like my father's finally here, quietly reminding me of what truly matters. Beth felt gentle tears forming softly, deeply touched by Nathan's quiet openness, the courage he'd found to face his painful memories. "I'm so proud of you, Nathan. Of us. Facing silence and fear was the bravest thing we've ever done." Nathan smiled softly, gently brushing her tears away, his touch warm, reassuring. "And we'll keep doing it. Every day. Loving honestly, courageously, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts. Because now we know exactly what silence costs." They stood quietly together, lakeside beauty softly enveloping them, gentle whispers of leaves overhead, water lapping softly at the shore, quiet reminders of life's fragile yet resilient beauty. Beth felt deeply at peace, knowing clearly their story wouldn't end neatly, easily, but its imperfection made it deeply meaningful. In quiet reflection, she softly asked Nathan, voice gently vulnerable, "Nathan, do you ever wonder what our story means? If our struggles could help others understand love differently?" Nathan quietly squeezed her hand, thoughtfully nodding. "Maybe our story is just a gentle reminder that courage isn't absence of fear, it's simply choosing love despite uncertainty. Maybe someone else can learn from our mistakes, choose honesty sooner, avoid the quiet regrets we carry." Beth smiled gently, quietly hopeful, eyes softly bright. Maybe that's the point. Sharing our story, gently encouraging others toward honesty, courage, love, even when it's hard. Nathan nodded softly, gently affirming her quiet thought. "Then let's do exactly that. Keep sharing our imperfect, quiet story openly, honestly." As the sun gently climbed higher, Beth and Nathan lingered quietly, hearts intertwined softly by quiet courage and genuine connection. Their love wasn't perfect, wasn't without pain, but it was real, honest, quietly profound. Later, sitting quietly, alone, Beth thoughtfully posted a gentle message online, softly inviting her community into reflection. Maybe love doesn't always arrive on time. Sometimes it comes late, quietly, imperfectly, but never too late. If you've experienced love like this, love that taught you courage, honesty, and hope despite uncertainty, I'd love to hear your story. Maybe together we can gently remind each other, even when love comes late, it always matters. She placed the phone down softly, quietly, hopeful her words might gently resonate, encouraging others toward courage, toward love openly expressed, even if imperfect, even if late. Beth sat quietly, breathing deeply, softly embracing her own, imperfect yet beautiful story, filled gently with pain and healing, silence and honesty, quiet loss and profound courage. In quiet reflection, she whispered softly into the gentle morning air, heart quietly certain, "Our love might have been late, but maybe, just maybe, it arrived exactly when it was meant to." Perhaps love doesn't always arrive exactly when we expect it. Sometimes it comes quietly, late, and imperfect. But it's never truly too late to welcome it into our lives. What about you? Have you ever experienced a love that arrived later than you expected? I'd love to hear your story. Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your honest words might gently inspire someone else to find the courage they need to embrace love and life again. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. Don't forget to subscribe so we can continue exploring stories of love, hope, and second chances together.